Although defined differently, responsibility and accountability are related, and both are relevant to leader character. The traditional dictionary definitions of responsible and accountable are like this. Responsible means answerable or accountable for something within one's power, control, or management. Accountable means subject to obligation to report, explain, or justify something. Responsible, answerable. So you can see accountability tends to be seen as rules and regulations, while responsibility can be thought of more as a choice. I would ask that you follow the link on this page and view a very short video that was made back in 2008 by the CEO of the Canadian company Maple Leaf Foods. I would like you to pay attention to this short video, and once you've watched it, take your journal, your notebook, and jot down some ideas about your impressions of this gentleman. What are your thoughts? What predictions would you make about this whole situation? So now that you've had a chance, let me give you the backstory. The first hints of trouble arrived at headquarters on August 7, 2008, when a distributor from Maple Leaf Foods, which is the biggest supplier of fresh and processed meats to Canadian retail outfits, called in a report. A public health official had been in touch with the distributor about several of the company's sliced meat products. It appeared that an investigation was about to take place. Within a week, 3 meat products that had been packed in the company's Toronto plant were under investigation. Immediately, the 3 products were put on hold with orders to neither ship nor sell, and Maple Leaf began to prepare for a recall. The president and CEO of Maple Leaf, Michael McCain, received a late-night call on August 16th, just a short week later. Listeria had been discovered in 2 of the Maple Leaf products. Just to remind you, Listeria is the bacteria that causes listeriosis, a serious infection that begins with the ingestion of tainted foods and quickly spreads to the gastrointestinal tract. Typical symptoms include fever, aches, diarrhea, but even more severe complications include convulsions, and death sometimes ensues. At McCain's directive, the company initiated a voluntary recall of all products made on the suspected lines at the plant, and press releases exploring the potential threat to the public health were issued. On August 19th, Maple Leaf was notified of a possible link between one of its products and the death of an individual. In response, Maple Leaf immediately shut down its Toronto plant and recalled 191 products. 4 days later, a definite link was established. McCain then undertook the task of delivering the public statement that you just watched. One YouTube reviewer noted that McCain looked worried and weary. Well, of course he looks nervous, another reviewer responded. He just ignored a room full of highly paid lawyers who told him that if he told the truth, the company's systems would break down. He'd probably get sued for a great deal of money. I don't know him, but in this case, he sure looks like a stand-up guy. As it turned out, the consensus was that in the wake of the crisis, McCain was indeed a stand-up guy, and that Maple Leaf could be trusted despite this catastrophe. How did this situation turn around, you might ask? Well, McCain was a constant and calming presence. He came across as both transparent and decisive. The company destroyed tens of millions of dollars worth of products. In a series of subsequent press conferences for Maple Leaf Foods, they described what it was learning from the ongoing investigation, explained what steps they were taking to correct the problem as soon as they were identified, invited the media to inspect and view the offending plant, and they settled a class action lawsuit in record time. Leader character is a subjective trait that might seem to defy quantification. To measure it, KRW International co-founder Fred Keel and his colleagues began by sifting through the anthropologist Donald Brown's classic inventory of 500 behaviors and characteristics that are recognized and displayed in all human societies. Drawing on that list, they identified 4 moral principles: integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion as universal. KRW then sent anonymous surveys to employees at 84 U.S. companies and nonprofits, asking, among other things, how consistently their CEOs and management teams embodied those 4 principles. They also interviewed many of the executives and analyzed the organization's financial results. At one end of the spectrum are the 10 executives that Keel and his group call the virtuoso CEOs, those whose employees gave them and their management teams high ratings on all 4 principles. People reported that these leaders frequently engaged in behaviors that revealed strong character. For instance, standing up for what's right, expressing concern for the common good, letting go of mistakes, their own and others, and showing empathy. At the other end of the spectrum, the 10 lowest scores that you see here, Keel calls them the self-focused CEOs, and they were often described as warping the truth for personal gain, caring mostly about themselves and their own financial security, no matter the cost to others. So the question is really there, do the leaders who need to work on their character really know it? In most cases, no, they're pretty deluded. When asked to rate themselves on the 4 moral principles, the self-focused CEOs gave themselves much higher marks than their employees did. The CEOs who got high ratings from employees actually gave themselves slightly lower scores, perhaps a sign of their humility and further evidence of a strong character. Fortunately, in the report, Keel points out that leaders can increase their self-awareness through objective feedback from the people they live and work with, but they have to be receptive to that feedback, and those with the biggest character deficiencies tend to be in denial. It's time to pause again and take a look at the questions on this slide and jot your thoughts in your journal or notebook. Be sure to have some thoughts there so that you can bring them to our conversations in class. Just as a PS, some of the leaders noted that the situation at Maple Leaf Foods was something that was clearly beyond the company's control, and that the system for calculating cash bonuses and stock rewards should be adjusted, and perhaps executives and managers should be rewarded, even though they did not meet their individual or collective goals as they struggled through the crisis. McCain, however, would hear none of it. He said, and I quote, "We are accountable for delivering results to our shareholders, and we did not deliver. There will be bad years like this, and there will be good ones when we deliver and plan beyond. We earn bonuses when we make or exceed our plans. When we don't, we won't." His statement suggests that accountability is in part about defining the rules of the game and then playing by those rules, in good times and in bad. Just as an aside, McCain was actually named CEO of the Year by the Canadian Press for 2008. According to Mary Crossan and her fellow researchers, there are 4 character elements that contribute to the leadership dimension of accountability. They suggest that they are the 4 that you see on this screen. Taking ownership means that the leader personally engages in the salient, important, and challenging issues. Taking ownership means the leader will explain what has happened and what needs to be done to move forward. Accepting consequences involves the leader acknowledging the responsibility to justify decisions, actions, and outcomes. Essentially, the leader is willing to be held accountable. In terms of acting in conscientious ways, we're talking here about being dependable and reliable, consistently attentive, and perform leadership duties thoroughly and well. This can range from the unheralded day-to-day or all the way to the heroic. Acting in a responsible way is where the leader acknowledges personal obligations as part of the role. The leader stands answerable for decisions and actions. These 4 character elements actually work together to create accountability. Mary Crossan and her colleagues say, for example, that being accountable requires individuals to take ownership and accept consequences for the actions initiated under their leadership. Individuals that demonstrate conscientiousness and acknowledge the personal obligations associated with any role take ownership and accept the consequences of their actions. You may remember a story from some years ago from Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo boasts that they build generations of loyal customers. They talk about earning a lifelong relationship, one customer at a time. However, the former CEO, John Stumpf, also used the slogan, 8 is great, referring to the goal of selling 8 products to each Wells Fargo customer. According to employee complaints, Wells Fargo had a strict quota regulating the number of daily solutions that its bankers must reach. These solutions included the opening of all new banking and credit card accounts. Managers constantly hounded, berated, and demeaned and threatened employees to meet such unreachable quotas. Managers often told employees to do whatever it takes to reach the quotas. Employees who did not reach their quotas were often required to work beyond their typical work schedule without compensation and/or were even threatened with termination. To try and reach their goals, bank employees got creative, and they opened about 2 million fake accounts over a period of several years. They used bundling, telling customers they could not open an account without another one being attached. They moved funds from customers' current accounts to start new ones, created bogus email addresses for online banking services, and they submitted applications for over 565,443 credit card accounts without authorization. Customers ended up paying overdraft fees and other fees for accounts that they did not open and did not even realize they owned. Although Wells Fargo's leaders stated that they were accountable for the fake accounts, their actions said otherwise. They blamed employees. Wells Fargo leaders actually knew about the fake accounts and actually warned some employees to stop. They had a 2-day ethics workshop back in 2014 during which employees were told not to open accounts without customers' knowledge and agreement. And management also terminated some of the employees caught engaging in such behavior. But the behavior continued. Why? The sales quotas remained the same. They were still unattainable, and employees were afraid and needed to keep their jobs. When the news went public, the CEO Stumpf immediately blamed employees. He also tried to downplay the number of terminated employees by referring to them in percentage terms of all employees. He said 1% versus 5,300 who were terminated. Many of the remaining employees were so afraid of losing their jobs that they suffered anxiety attacks, feelings of guilt, sleeplessness, etc. CEO Stumpf also refused to acknowledge the systemic nature of the problem and did not admit that the sales targets were unrealistic, and no senior level managers were held accountable. During the Senate Banking Committee hearings, Senator Elizabeth Warren questioned Stumpf. She said, and I quote, "You have said I'm accountable, but what have you already done to hold yourself accountable? It's about responsibility. So you haven't resigned, you haven't returned a single nickel of your personal earnings, you haven't fired a single senior executive. Instead, evidently, your definition of accountable is to push blame on your low-level employees who don't have the money for a fancy PR firm to defend themselves. This is what I call gutless leadership." Incentives and regulations can ensure some accountability. Incentives can be useful, and we do need some regulations to hold people accountable. Yet these often fail because they're short-term. They encourage the minimum, and they rely on regulators, who also may fall short. Thus, there's the dilemma in designing incentive systems to reward behavior. Often it results in losing sight of what is most important. Long-term rewards are difficult to implement. Thought leader Newman suggests that rather than aspiring to be rewarded by external incentives, leaders with strong character tend to decide on which external measures are most important to themselves, to others, and to the organization as a whole. We also need to be cautious about trying to regulate ethical behavior. Accountability systems that encourage and ensure compliance don't necessarily encourage ethical behavior, and sometimes may even discourage good judgment. Like incentives, accountability measures are often short-term wins. They don't inspire excellence. We can, to an extent, force consistent behavior, but we cannot force people to behave with integrity. In this minimal sense, accountability is simply meeting expectations. But if we want to be proactive, then we might consider assigning responsibility. With delegation comes the authority to use good judgment and the responsibility to justify. Regulations, on one hand, can encourage individuals and organizations to meet the minimum standards. However, they may also open the door to deception and actually discourage good old common sense. When it comes to fostering a culture of accountability, context is important. The everybody is doing it rationale is often the response for misbehaviors. Fighting against the status quo can be a significant challenge for leaders. Thought leader Amy Newsom suggests that rather than looking to external measures, leaders should aim to create a culture of accountability. In organizations where leaders serve as role models, faculty and staff can self-correct with regular feedback and guidance. Accountability in this environment becomes a conversation. There is significant research that demonstrates the importance of the leader's role in shifting the context and encouraging ethical judgment. The data suggests that when leaders serve as role models and hold their people accountable, followers make better decisions, especially those at the top when they set the tone. The emphasis is focused on developing self-accountability. Another significant piece of culture of accountability is providing followers with regular and frequent feedback, in addition to these annual reviews. We have explored feedback in this course, and you will continue to explore it in other courses, especially as you move forward into your evaluation cycle training. So we're just going to add a few more tidbits here to think about. Worst case scenario is limiting feedback to the annual review conversation. It feels insincere and often punitive. Smaller, more frequent assessments and feedback can offer a more complete picture and allow followers to know where they stand on a regular basis. One interesting option might be to allow followers to request feedback when they feel they need a conversation. Goal setting and progress reporting and monitoring can also help keep individuals accountable. Regular coaching is also valuable in preventing small issues from turning into large problems. Essentially, the recommendation here is to give feedback as the need arises instead of waiting for a formal evaluation conversation. That can cause a leader to be critical rather than supportive. Accountability means having high standards and holding yourself to them as you do others. This table on this slide shows a continuum of responses that leaders might choose from to hold themselves and others accountable. On the left-hand side are ways that leaders hold others accountable before and after an event or some negative occurrence. You can see that responding before an event or an issue, such as column number 2, is only slightly better than after the event, column number 1. On the right-hand side of the chart, you can see more proactive ways to avoid problems. By holding ourselves accountable, we set expectations before problems occur, such as column 3. Assigning tasks and providing checklists that can be implemented, it may actually encourage minimum performance and might be compared to that rules and regulations. The ideal environment is one in which leaders develop skills in holding themselves and others more accountable, such as in column 4. The focus is on results, and with trust and regular feedback, followers have the opportunity to take ownership for their work. In the end, they may feel valued and more self-reliant, and a sense of self-accountability. Once again, I'm going to ask you to pause and look at the questions on this slide, and in your journal or your notebook, jot down your answers to these 10 questions. After you've done that, please sit back and reflect. Where are the strengths in your organization? Where do you note areas of challenge? I look forward to hearing this in your conversation with us in the next class meeting. An accountable leader encourages those in his or her care to take the initiative to talk through challenges that arise. Accounting then becomes a conversation around how the follower is doing and what can be improved. Ideally, in an accountable environment, followers also answer to each other. In an accountable culture, people hold themselves accountable, admit mistakes, and take responsibility for solving problems, and leaders handle mistakes with grace and forgiveness. When we discussed vulnerability, back when we talked about Brené Brown and other thought leaders, we noted the importance of admitting mistakes and apologizing. Admission can become part of the solution if we ask for it or offer help. There is some research from the University of Michigan and Stanford University that found that taking responsibility for issues can lead to better outcomes. Leaders appear to be in control, and this in turn helps with transparency, leading with integrity, and cultivating trust. Whether or not a leader has caused the problem, accountable leaders step up to make things right. Now, despite the best efforts, the reality is that mistakes can and do happen, and a culture of accountability needs to include forgiveness. If you remember that researcher, Fred Keel, that I referenced earlier, he identified forgiveness as one of the 4 moral habits of leaders with strong character. According to Keel, he says that forgiveness involves letting go of one's mistakes, letting go of others' mistakes, and focusing on what's right versus what is wrong. Forgiveness is associated with positive outcomes, especially such things as heart health, mental health, and happiness. While failing to forgive may lead to anger, resentment, it's also been linked to negative health issues. In organizations, forgiveness can facilitate a more positive environment. When leaders offer forgiveness instead of an accusatory statement or tone, something like "how could you" is replaced with a more empathetic tone. What do you think happened? The leader genuinely cares about his or her followers and is curious. How can we prevent this from happening in the future? What can we learn from this experience? Of course, leaders need to discern between mistakes and willful violations. And in the latter cause, leaders can still forgive, but trust is generally damaged. As future leaders, holding yourself accountable means being open to criticism. It requires vulnerability, authenticity, risking exposure, and being true to who you really are. It can be tough choices. I'm going to ask you to pause again and to download the Personal Accountability Self-Assessment from the module presentation folder. Remember that this type of an activity is to encourage reflection and goal setting. You want to make note of any areas that are growing edges for you and things that you may want to attend to as you deepen your leadership virtue of accountability. As leaders, we're going to be tasked with building accountability in our teams. Building team accountability requires that we understand a few dynamics because it's more complicated than we might initially recognize. It goes beyond the responsibility for the outcomes, which is obviously important, but effective leaders know that they need a culture of accountability in their teams that provides the inputs needed to achieve the expected team performance. Holding teams accountable is one of the most important things successful leaders do, but it is also one of the hardest. First of all, teams, by definition, are made up of individuals. We can't forget that. What is needed is an understanding that society tends to truly value individual contribution while also and separately valuing team contributions. This is a very interesting contradiction, and it causes a great deal of confusion as to which should be valued the most. Without accountability in a team, it is much more difficult and stressful to achieve your goals. Each team member needs to be accountable for their actions so that the team can achieve results as laid out in the plan. We can do this if we recognize where the individual plays a more vital role and where teamwork plays a more vital role. For instance, when there's a sudden chaos or emergency of some sort, you want one or more individuals to step up and take the lead. When, on the other hand, you need smart thinking to solve a problem or transform a process, teams tend to be better. With that being noted, individuals who are placed on teams also matter. In the HBR article that was written by Grattan and Erickson back in 2007, it was noted that the greater the proportion of the experts a team had, the more likely it was to disintegrate into non-productive conflict or stalemates. These kinds of teams are not teams. They were individuals coming together under the facade of working as a team. It was simply just a group of individuals. Yet, most individuals in team formation want to do what they're supposed to do. Their intent is generally very good. The missing link is that what a team is supposed to do gets lost in translation. Often it's assumed that they just know what to do. The missing link is that the team of individuals needs to know what they, as a collective whole, are accountable for accomplishing. And as leaders, it's our job to provide them with the definition of what it is we're holding them accountable for doing and increase the communication to increase accountability. For example, it's important to have a common purpose to set the stage for any team initiative by talking about the why. Why are they here? Why are they working on this project? Connect what you need the team to do with why you need them to spend time doing it. What's the point? Why does it matter? We always tend to tell a team of people what to do, and many leaders are good at that. As a result, the why gets completely ignored. The sign of a high-performing team is the ability to rally around a common purpose. We also need clear expectations. What is it that you ultimately need the team to do? These are the accountability questions leaders set to clear expectations for the team. You need to tell the team over and over again so that all the team members are clear on what is expected of them. It often takes several repetitions before the entire team would be able to communicate those expectations clearly. Communication and alignment is also critical. As time passes, as part of their leadership development, it's a leader's job to keep a team focused and aligned so that everyone's involved and moving in the same direction. How are they going to do what you need them to do? What resources might they consider using? Keeping everyone focused, over and over, communication with them, asking questions, reminding them what they do is what they're doing, why they're doing it, and that it's important. A leader's job is to keep them all rowing in the same direction. Communication fosters long-term sustainability. Collaboration and coaching is also very important. And this is the kind of place that you really understand that you can make adjustments in real time. So monitor and progress and coach your people. Don't tell them what to do, coach them. Listen to them 80% of the time and talk with them 20% of the time to increase your team's performance. Nurture them to converse with each other. Be a resource for them. What roadblocks can you remove? How can you help to remove those? If you've tasked your people to do something that's important, then it deserves your support. Did everyone on the team do what they said they were going to do? Consequences. Most people see the word consequences and they immediately think of negative connotations. We tend to believe that consequences can also be positive. Make the consequences and the results visible. Talk to your team strategically versus tactically, which is usually done through questions versus statements. For some reason, leaders are the first to let people know when something's not right or if it's gone awry. But when things go well, it's almost if success is glossed over. The consequence of that, though, is that you create a remedial culture. So as a leader, work to give equal or even more weight to what's going right and celebrate those small wins. I'm going to ask you to pause once again and download the Team Accountability Assessment from the presentation folder for this module. Rank your current school or district and score your assessment. Jot down your thoughts and reflections on this exercise in your notebook. In conclusion, I'm going to ask you to go into kind of an imaginary reflection. I want you to imagine that you are participating in an interview for a leadership role. The lead interview is going to ask you a question and asks you to talk about a time that you made a mistake. What would you share? Think about it. What do you think the interview would want to hear? How would you begin to respond? How would you present the situation without blaming or criticizing? Is there a way you could share about a mistake you made in a way that shows you learned from the experience?